The title of today's session, I first want to draw your attention. Sustainability challenge across sectors. In order to highlight the urgency or the framework within which I think about this topic, let me try to sum up first how the climate debate has been or where it is right now. I think 90s were mostly about emissions, how to control them, how to reduce them, how to set targets about them, and how, in the latter half, how to negotiate about them. The first decade of this century, last decade, was mostly about adaptation, that we have not succeeded in moving forward on emissions issue, and there are loads of people very vulnerable. Let's start talking about adaptation and setting up some financial mechanisms for them. I think this decade is not about sustainability. Sustainability, in my understanding, is how to perform well or cope with change or climate change and stay afloat through robust corporate management. In my view, that is a passé, that's a debate of the 90s, and therefore, I like to present to you this decade is about loss and damage. And simply put, loss and damage is permanent loss because of climate change and permanent damage because of climate change. That cannot be repaired and cannot be reversed. We have seen some very ferocious extreme events in recent past, and now it's beyond doubt that the cost is so high and the periodicity and their frequency it's so high that even the risk transfer concepts whereby insurance industry could come and share the risk is becoming very, very questionable, not a very tenable proposition for a large segment of society in many, many parts of the world. Therefore, against this context, if the name of the game is loss and damage, let me present to you something that all of us know and all of us have known for the last 2 decades perhaps, 7 challenges in sustainability or in loss and damage, or to put it broadly, in climate change debate. First challenge is about CO2 constraints. I think it's very easy for us to do projections for the century, for 2, 3, 4, 5 decades. And all of us will know that business as usual is not acceptable. And many of us in our respective national settings are giving voluntary targets. Honorable Prime Minister of India yesterday suggested 20% decrease at 2005 baseline by 2020. There are several such national targets that are emerging, and we know, instinctively all of us know, as admirable, as desirable as these are, they are not enough. So, they are not acceptable, they are not enough because that is what appears to be feasible at this stage. But they do not tell us what the carbon budget should be for a particular sector or a particular nation or a particular region for 2 degrees, 2.5 degrees, for 3 degrees, 3.5 degrees, 4.5, and so on and so forth. That budgeting, that science, that rigor has not trickled down to the national levels or for that matter to the sectors like water, food, agriculture, livestock, and so on and so forth. So the absence of carbon budgets is the first challenge. Second is the physical impact. We know in episodical terms perhaps, flood in Pakistan in 2010 touched 20 million people. That will be probably more than the total population of all OSS countries. Or it will be roughly more than 2/3 population of Canada. The scale is huge. We do not always appreciate. When it comes in dollar terms, the economic costs tend to be very raw, very preliminary to calculate. Typically, assessments are based on infrastructural cost, bridges, roads that need to be rebuilt. The cost to lives and livelihoods, the cultures is not calculated, is not brought mainstream. Methodologies are inadequate there. So I'll submit the second challenge, therefore, that we don't know enough about the physical impact. We know it's happening. We just heard from our colleague, it's happening left, right, and center, but somehow it has not convinced our policymakers to take it to various sectors. And therefore, the debate continues to be at superfluous level of mitigation or something, but what we want to calculate is cost of migration, the cost of DRR, the cost of food security or insecurity, droughts, and so on and so forth. Third challenge I already referred to is in terms of economic cost. It's tremendous. Estimates and methodologies will vary. There is no uniformity and probably very hard to aspire to have one. Net result is that for financial mechanisms, there's no transparent, easy way to calculate which way the finances should be flowing, which sectors should be priority, which regions should be priority, and also how the financial funds should be managed. Should the existing or recycling be acceptable? So normally, in a country like mine, in Pakistan, I tend to think it could be costing us 4 to 10% of our GDP, and it may be accelerating with coming years, and this is making life much harder. It's much harder to undertake development. It's much harder to meet our Millennium Development Goals, and with climate change and with these challenges, I think it's becoming a distant dream. Next challenge is time frame. Key decisions are postponed, and the cost will keep increasing. We are trying to do what seems like feasible today, palatable today. But if some targets are to be set, the timelines are very severe, are very serious. And I think in global negotiations and in sectoral conversations, the timelines conversation has been absent for the most part. It is not an endless debate, as my colleague was highlighting earlier. There are very serious time constraints that we face in every fragile ecosystem, in every region, be it oasis countries, island nations, or Himalayan nations where the glaciers are receding, or coastal lines. So in that context, I think we are not bringing the timelines into context of our conversations. Last two things. Development is huge, and then we see mostly debate is about mitigation and little bit about adaptation. Now, it needs to be seen somewhat differently. They need to be merged in many, many ways. So the development needs to include low carbon growth, which is a partly mitigation issue. It needs to have adaptive strategies woven in, and therefore the development has to be climate compatible development, which is going to cost more, but the frameworks, the strategies, the policies at the national and subnational levels across the countries, such as India and Pakistan and Indonesia and the rest, need to be sensitive to these three elements and need to weld them together if that's possible. Third is again, commonsensical and very hard. End of the day, it's about people and institutions. How often we see how comfortable are water sector people sitting with health sector people and health sector people sitting with foresters, and how often foresters can sit with economists and so on and so forth. And the moment you begin that, tough battles and priorities begin to confront us. And therefore, most of global debate, most of national debate, tend to sidestep that issue, and therefore most of global debate has been revolving around 2 or 3 main themes, and I'm just refreshing your memory. Shared and differentiated responsibility, that became Group of 77 versus the North, and NORCED versus basic, which means accelerated speed growing country and their emission rates. And what we forgot in the process, that no, at the national and subnational level, we need to have sectoral carbon budgets. We need to have timelines. We need to integrate development in those. And of course, we need to have to study the physical impacts and mainstream that in policy making. And then, of course, we need to integrate adaptation, mitigation concerns into our development agenda to somehow think that climate compatible development can incorporate all those things. Now, at the heart of all this, and that's my final point coming to this, when we talk about these fiefdoms and turf wars, we forget that root cause of vulnerability is our economic policies that are not inclusive. Irrespective of climate change, we were excluding millions and millions of people from the development patterns. A very large segment in percentage term of population continues to be outside the mainstream, and therefore they tend to be vulnerable, and they are still on the margins of development, not the benefit. And trickle-down methodologies have not worked. So in order to address the climate challenge, we'll have to revisit our climate paradigm. And when I say climate compatible development, essentially that I'm saying that our development need to be it green growth, be it climate smart or climate compatible development, it need to be inclusive to reach out to those people who have been marginalized over a period of time. With these few reflections, I thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr.